Welcome to episode number 17. I'm CJ Wellerman. Thank you for joining us. This week I examine how the Western media is exaggerating Taliban wrongdoings in Afghanistan, while at the same time ignoring actual Hindu extremist violence in neighbouring India. But first, a quick reminder to hit the subscribe button below so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Now let's get into it. To be sure, the Taliban is an extremist religious group responsible for war crimes and an array of human rights violations against women, journalists, human rights activists, and ethnic and cultural minorities. That much we know, and that much we accept, mostly because the international news media has spent the past 2 decades fixated on anything remotely related to Islamic extremism. And much like the way Ivan Pavlov trained his dog to salivate at the ringing of a bell, news media outlets in the US and Europe have trained their audiences to stand to attention and read any story related to Muslim men doing bad things. And if the media can't find or even make up those stories, then it splatter paints its news feeds with Orientalists and cartoonish images of Muslims to reinforce the idea they are violent, foreign, and suspicious. A 2019 study found that Western mainstream newspapers publish an average of 8 negative stories about Muslims or Islam per day. Why? Because Islamophobia sells like an umbrella in a rainstorm. You remember what I said about Pavlov's dog, right? Now, when we look at the way in which the media is reporting the situation in Afghanistan, we see Western media outlets clamoring for stories that reaffirm pre-existing notions about the Taliban being a merciless and bloodthirsty gang of religiously inspired land pirates. But the Taliban isn't handing the media these stories because the militant group is on its very best behaviour at the moment, knowing all eyes of the world are gazed upon its every word and action at this moment. So in the absence of reports showing the Taliban doing typically awful things, the news media is either exaggerating or completely making up stories to attract global eyeballs and page clicks. I mean, look at this completely made up story. It's based on a single unnamed source, absent any kind of verification or corroboration, and most likely planted by a former Afghan government official to whip up anti-Taliban hysteria in the United States. The double standard here doesn't need pointing out, but I'll point it out anyway. There's no way, no how Fox News would publish a story based on a single unnamed source that accused American soldiers of murdering Afghan women, even though there's no shortage of verified reports to draw upon from the past like this one here. But let me make this clear. The Taliban is still the same regressive and violent extremist group we have come to know over the course of the past 25 years, and there's little reason to believe it won't carry out the same kind of brutalities again and soon. That said, news media organisations have a responsibility to report what is happening in Kabul now, not what might or might not happen in the future, and it certainly shouldn't be inventing stories while it waits or anticipates reports of Taliban committed atrocities. Worse, the media is ignoring an actual human rights apocalypse that is taking place right now in neighbouring India, where hundreds of millions of radicalised Hindu extremists are every bit as hostile to democracy, pluralism, women and religious minorities as the Taliban. I mean, even one of India's most eminent Hindu scholars says India's ruling political party and its Hindu allies have Talibanized Hinduism. But why is the Western media ignoring Indian state-backed human rights violations committed by Talibanized Hindu extremists? Well, to put it bluntly, Hindu men don't scare Western audiences the same way Muslim men do, therefore making it much more difficult for Western media outlets to profit from Hindu extremists who are responsible for violence and misogyny, even when said violence is akin to that carried out by the Taliban. It's just an observable and irrefutable fact that right now not a single Taliban spokesperson is calling for genocide against religious minorities. In fact, right now the Taliban is calling for amnesty and forgiveness, urging the country against vengeance. But meanwhile in India, Modi government-backed Hindu extremists are calling for a genocide against 200 million Muslims almost each and every day. In the video I'm about to show you, you'll see a prominent ally of the Indian government urging Hindu men to each father 6 children and then prepare them to kill Muslims, while also encouraging them to sell their property in order to buy weapons. These kinds of speeches are made almost every week and in all parts of the country and in front of massive audiences, like this one I'm about to show you, in which a Hindu leader pleaded with Hindus to kill Muslim men and rape Hindu women.
मुस्लिम भाई, अरे किसके भाई? ये साले कसाई हैं, नंगली की बेटी के, और आपके अंदर ताकत है, जो इन जवानों में पैदा कर.
Oh, and by the way, he said this in front of an audience that included members of India's ruling party and on-duty police officers who cheered the hateful Hindutva preacher with great enthusiasm. And while all of this is going on, Muslim journalists are being arrested and threatened with prison for reporting anti-Muslim hate crimes, including Washington Post columnist Rana Ayub. These genocidal speeches and rallies are now so mainstream that they now take place just hundreds of metres from the Indian Parliament, like this one on August 14th, in which thousands of Hindutva fanatics chanted, "Kill the Muslim pigs," and Muslims will scream the name of Lord Ram when we slit their necks. The leaders of this rally then went on television to label Muslims a cancer that must be removed from the country. But again, no arrests and no reports in the international news media. More importantly, this violence isn't confined to just acts of speech, but also acts of physical violence. We are witnessing Muslims being lynched, raped, murdered, or severely beaten on a near-daily basis by mobs of radicalized Hindu men, as happened to this Muslim street vendor on Saturday. Needless to say, this heinous attack wasn't reported by a single mainstream media outlet in the Western world. No doubt they're far too busy reporting made-up stories about the Taliban to care. The thing is this: at the same time the international community has exaggerated the threat of Islamic extremism, it has completely ignored the threat posed by hundreds of millions of Hindutva fanatics. It's impossible to ignore that videos of mob lynchings and public calls for genocide are not streaming out of Afghanistan into our social media feeds, but instead are emerging out of India. So let's compare apples with apples. Whereas the Taliban is a ragtag bunch of radicalized misfits, numbering roughly 70,000 militants in Afghanistan, the total number of Hindutva extremists in India numbers in the hundreds of millions. I mean, a single Hindutva paramilitary organization boasts more than 1 million militants alone. But RSS is not some radicalized fringe group that exists and operates outside the mainstream. It sits at the center of political power, providing the ideological DNA for the country's ruling party, an ideology that was inspired by the Nazi Party and other European fascists in the 1930s. Its founders stated openly that their objective is to do to Muslims in India and Kashmir what Nazi Germany did to the Jews in Europe. You know, genocide. And that's just RSS, which is just one of literally dozens of mainstream Hindutva organizations, with many, including Vishva Hindu Parishad, anchoring themselves in the corridors of political power around the world, including the United States. The Hindutva lobby is now so influential in the US that the US government paid VHP nearly $1 million in taxpayer money that was assigned to Americans for COVID relief. So whereas the Taliban operates almost exclusively in isolation from the rest of the world, hundreds of millions of Hindutva extremists not only enjoy full backing from the nuclear-armed Indian state, but also the world's sole military superpower, the United States. And at the same time the US feigns concerns for the well-being and safety of women living under the rule of the Taliban, it totally ignores the fact that rape and femicide are now commonplace in India. In fact, India is the most dangerous place in the world for a woman. But this reality doesn't seem to matter to Western interventionists, particularly those who premised and justified the US military occupation on saving Muslim women from the Taliban. And then there's the fact Western governments have exaggerated stories about gender persecution in Afghanistan. Here's a leaked memo showing the CIA urged its allies to use concerns for Afghan women as a ruse to increase public support for the NATO military occupation in Afghanistan. Okay, a word of warning. What I'm about to show is a video of an attack that occurred this week, in which a Hindu man beat his wife in the middle of the street and in broad daylight and without a single onlooker coming to her assistance, which illustrates just how normalized violence against women has become in the age of Hindutva. Again, it goes without saying that had this attack taken place in Afghanistan, with a Muslim man beating a woman in broad daylight in the streets of Kabul, then it's all the Western media would be talking about, and you'd be seeing this clip play on endless loop on CNN and BBC News. But this is the first time you're seeing it. It also shouldn't be forgotten that India's ruling party is also imposing restrictions and diktats against women, including passing laws that ban Hindu women from marrying Muslim men. You know, the same kind of laws that the Nazis put in place to prevent non-Jewish Germans from marrying those with Jewish ancestry. Under Narendra Modi, we are witnessing the Nazification of India and the Talibanization of Hinduism at all levels of society. When Hindutva thugs aren't hunting for Muslim men they suspect are having relationships with Hindu women, they are selling prominent Muslim women as sex slaves in online mock auctions. And here's another thing. Western media outlets love reminding their audiences that the Taliban blew up ancient Buddhist statues in 2001. But they remain silent as Hindu fanatics attack and vandalize mosques and churches while the Indian government demolishes mosques as it did just last week in Haryana. And like the Taliban, Hindu extremists are waging a war against journalists and human rights activists. Earlier this year, Amnesty International chose to close its operations in India out of fear its employers would be attacked and imprisoned by the Indian government. How is any of this different to life under the Taliban? Clearly, it's not. And it's time the international news media acknowledges 200 million Indian Muslims face imminent genocide. Anyway, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please like and subscribe to this channel and help spread the word with your friends and family on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And please consider supporting this endeavour by becoming a member of our show at patreon.com/CJWellerman, exclusive membership benefits to those who do. But for now, good night, good morning, or good day, wherever you are, and stay blessed.